Ready.
Okay, let's start. Well, it's an absolute privilege to have a chat with you today, Tobias. Would you mind just giving the audience a bit of background of who you are and a bit about what you're doing at the moment?
Well, my name is Tobias Scholz. I'm from the University of Siegen. My background is in human resource management and organizational behavior, so in general business administration. And well, esports, I'm actually in esports for nearly 20 years. Started out as a journalist first. And after that, transferred to research. And since then, loving it to research this new field.
Yeah, I've heard a few people have moved from journalism to research. What exactly in the research area of esports are you most passionate about?
I think for me, is esports more and more like a real life, in real time experiment of how digitization is working, how the digitized society could look like, because it is a global digital phenomenon. And you realize or you see what is happening in front of your eyes, especially in business. Most of the industries are, compared to esports, relatively boring. Yeah, look at the car development going to electro. It is now nearly 10 to 20 years, and actually how many electric cars are on the street. And if you look at esports, every 5 years it transformed completely. So from research perspective, something is happening in front of your eyes, and that is actually quite cool.
I think that's very true. I'm sure in 5 years again, the whole environment will be completely different.
Yeah.
You have organized a few different initiatives. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, so the biggest one is definitely the Esports Research Network, because this network, or Esports Research Network, is the idea to connect researchers in esports. As you know, or many know, esports is so diverse. You have so many different people who are trying to research it, and it is truly interdisciplinary. So the idea behind this network is to get people together, to get researchers from all around the world, from all fields, be it my field in business, be it medicine, be it sociology, computer scientists, and all that, and get them together. Because what I realized, and probably you as well, we are scattered around. The other one is the esports yearbook. Is now 10 years old.
Wow.
Was, I think, the first edited book in esports with a academic background. It started out more from a journalistic perspective, but later on, I think the last 2 editions are now completely academic. Yeah, the last one is a more local one, is our university esports team, Siegen Bisons, which may not be that new or that novel, but just recently we have a mascot, the Siggy the Bison, and it is now the official mascot of the university.
That's amazing.
Have no idea if anybody else achieved that, but they choose from an esports team the mascot, which is really cool.
That is really cool. I didn't know about that. We'll make sure that there is a picture of the mascot on the page when this interview goes live, so we can all see what you're talking about there.
Definitely.
You've definitely been involved in a lot of different areas, from setting up organizations to conducting research to yourself. What have you found have been the biggest difficulties or struggles you've come across so far?
Yeah, I think the maybe this is maybe a bit of a dilemma, that esports is on the one hand completely different to any other field, but at the same time it is not that novel as many believe. To phrase it more in that way, we always discuss esports as sports, which is, in my opinion, a wrong decision or path we should not go to, because esports is a puzzle of sports, media, culture, business, social phenomenon, and probably many other parts. So many people try to put it into one label, although it is a composition of many labels. So that is something which is difficult to explain for outsiders, but at the same time makes it interesting to observe, because this is something we see so many times in new emerging things. Think about the whole platformization of society. We know what is happening. We know what this Amazon is doing, what iTunes or App Store is doing. But the things we are trying to regulate, or the way we are trying to regulate it, is no longer working. If you think about this whole discussion about Apple versus Epic, there is no one wrong, but also there's no one right. And suddenly we are in this situation where the rules of the old world, of the traditional world, are no longer working. And that makes it interesting, as esports is something where you see what is happening and where you can try it out before it is something like the App Store or something more difficult. So that makes it interesting but difficult to explain to other people or other fields, traditional fields, as they always grasp to their traditional framework.
Well, I think that very nicely brings me on to a big question that I get asked a lot, and I'm hoping you can help answer, which is a lot of students and a lot of people in other careers are looking to all of the opportunities available in esports, including the academic side. How do you think they make that first step? They potentially get involved in research and start to explore these fields that will be very alien to them otherwise.
The one thing I always say to them, nowadays not possible, but go to an event. So like ESL1 Cologne, that is something I did with several faculty members from my universities. Just took them there and showed them that is esports. Yeah, in addition, talk with esports researchers. There are already many people around there. They are happy to help. That is something that is important, because it is something, as any new field, you have to learn it, you have to read about it, and have to understand it. At the end, as said before, it is not that exotic if you understand that it has parts of a sport element, it has parts of an entertainment element, that it is something that is not that alien at all. But this first step can be quite problematic. And I experienced that with so many colleagues who said before, what the hell are you doing? And then, I don't understand what is happening in League of Legends or Counter-Strike, but I understand why this is fascinating. And I think that is the most important thing, to give that to researchers. Because if they don't understand why it is fascinating, they will always be biased on a negative side, because it does not make sense. The same for sports, actually. If you look at professional sports, it is not healthy. It is not good for the players. It is not good for the environment and all that. But
why do you say that, sorry?
Take a football player, or any football player. If he or she gets injured, the career is over. Normally, they don't have a plan B. If they don't make enough money in this 10 years period, they are screwed. If you look at the arenas that are built for the Olympic Games, that is an environmental disaster. If you look what is happening afterwards. But it is this phenomenon where they think, oh my God, it's Olympic Games, it is great and all that. Suddenly it makes it okay for society. So it is socially constructed. And that makes the discussion always difficult because if they don't understand the fascination, sports is always better than esports.
I think I agree with you to a degree, but what I've noticed there are two pathways. There are the super successful elite players in both esports and sports that are then able, through their persistent success, to then generate a brand. So examples of that are Federer, where they've got a brand much further on than simply tennis. And then you've got people like Faker that potentially represent a whole esports title. So you've got those super elite or super select individuals. But then I think esports is potentially better placed than the situation you're giving us for sports, because a lot of esports professionals, if they've had their day, as it were, switch to becoming coaches, becoming teachers, becoming some part of the esports infrastructure because it is such a hot button that people want to know about. I've seen a lot of innovation from pro players that have turned to other areas. So perhaps there's more opportunity there than traditional sports.
Yes, definitely. That is a really good point, especially if you look at even the younger or the oldest players. There are some of or if you look at esports companies today, most of them consist of players that were
Yes.
at the top level 10, 20 years ago. And that is the great opportunity of esports. Because there is this huge lack or void of digitization around them. To be open, I would love to see a career path in that way, that esports players after their career would go back to college and then finalize their degree and are perfectly fit for the working world afterwards.
I think they learn a lot of transferable skills along the way, and I am very optimistic that a few will even turn to research, which is where I wanted to focus on next, because you're one of the few guests I think we'll have that have a good working background in research as well. What I wanted to know is really to tackle quite a tricky question, I think, in esports research, which is threefold, which is there's a lot of interest in actually conducting research, but there seems to be a few barriers along the way. And the three that I see are access to the game, access to the players, and funding to do the research. Do you have a sort of strategy in mind or idea on how we can sort out these hurdles to get through?
Yeah, access to the game is actually a quite interesting point, because at least some publishers are extremely difficult to handle if it comes to data from their game. Even scrapping data from their game is quite difficult. For example, I had this discussion with someone doing Dota 2 research. They were able to scrap data in real time from a game, but realized that the code that the publisher or the developer did was 1-2 seconds lagging. So it was not real time because the code was terrible.
That is tragic.
Yeah, but I think we will always have some publisher who are traditionally terrible. But I see that, for example, companies like Riot Games, even Fortnite, Epic Games, are more and more open to that. If you're having a good question that helps them, can be quite useful for them. Therefore, I believe it might shift in the long run. In the short term, it is tricky. It probably still needs some persuasion. However, if you think about the players, I finally see a little shift in that way, that we have some professionalization in the scene. That they realize, if I talk with researcher, it might be helpful for me as well.
Yes.
That is something in which way, and that's where my business background is the same. You always have to frame research in business as well, that the other side gets something out of it.
I completely agree. And I think that will tackle potentially the last barrier I raised around funding, because right now funding seems obvious, but unfortunately is scarce from most universities. So if you give a value proposition to the organization, they will hopefully partially or fully fund it. The tricky bit and the very obvious bit will be around the conflicts of interest and how that's handled. So hopefully it will be around a project that has applicable or translatable value to the organization, but has other questions in mind too. So that even though you're answering one question that the organization will be very keen to get sorted out, there will be aims 2, 3, and 4 that will be helpful to the community and scientific understanding.
Yeah, definitely. And that is something you can easily do if, for example, in a questionnaire, that you have a set of questions that are specifically for the organization. And at the same time, I mean, if they are answering questions for half an hour, they can also answer 2 pages more. At some point, there is the idea that they still will answer your questions, and then you can split it in a certain perspective. Therefore, you can handle a bit this conflict of interest, that you say, okay, question 1 to 10 are for the organization and 11 to 30 are for your research. But yeah, it's something you still have to deal with it. That is probably something where other research fields have it more easier, because at least in business, the success factor is the organization needs to survive, and people are motivated to give their best performance. And that is something that can be easily translated to anything. So the success factor for the organization are the same as for your research. So I'm a bit happier about that situation.
I think the next question we have to ask is collaboration between researchers themselves. It seems so obvious. It seems like a winning formula. But I know, for example, in medicine, this is extremely hard to pull off well. People have different backgrounds, they're associated with different universities, there become contractual obligations involved. And then when you're handling certain information that has to be kept within the confines of certain areas of the world, have you, obviously running or being a big part of the ERN, how do we handle this problem?
Yeah, that is a big problem. Before that, I was quite involved in the field of media management. At least in esports, what I realized coming from media management and now in esports, that there is this ongoing curiosity and this hype about, or this motivation about esports. So this intrinsic motivation. My goal is to make esports better, whatever that means, but there is this intrinsic motivation, and that helps a lot to overcome those interdisciplinary barriers. And from my experience, that both sides, even if they are in completely different fields, are trying to meet in the middle ground. That is at least something from my experience, but it might be complicated in the long run, especially as you say, we are all at a university, we have other things to do, and we have some supervisors or some management which want results and all that.
Yeah.
But it is something where the ERN is trying to establish this common ground a bit more. At least I try to encourage this foundational work. What is esports? What is this phenomenon? How can we grasp it? Especially if you think about what is esports in Germany, what is esports in the UK? Completely different things. Just from the governmental perspective, from the perception of society, what games are played and all that. So getting the phenomenon more understandable for anybody might be helpful to create an environment where researchers think, okay, our common ground is, for example, we are doing research in the UK. Suddenly we have a common ground, even though we are maybe from medicine and business. And at least there is a common ground which we can translate and then hopefully lead to results.
Yeah, and you've passed me on to exactly the next question I wanted to focus on, if we can, which is standardization. Currently, exactly like what you said, I'm sure there are differences in what we think of esports in the UK compared to Germany. I think the differences become even bigger when you start talking about UK versus Japan or South Korea,
Yep.
where I've seen a lot more flexibility when you look more east in terms of what is an esport. And of course, there is also a lot of variance in your background discipline, comparing a psychologist with what as computer science would define as an esport. So my question is, I'm sure this will change, but we are often looking towards industry to help us decide what an esport is, because I think it is largely commercially led. But at the same time, I've certainly had industry look towards academia and say, help us here. What do we think esports is? So it's a bit of a chicken egg situation. But how do you think we sort of manage this problem and allow it to develop and nurture it in the right direction?
Yeah, that's definitely a tricky question because we have to step back a bit in that way. How standardized is sports? How standardized is traditional sports? There is no common ground. There is no traditional understanding of sports. There is a completely different definition of sports in UK and Germany. Heck, in Germany, we don't have a definition of sports.
Oh,
No
wow.
official definition. There are various definitions. And that is something we have to keep in mind, that esports is something which consists of so many different games. I think Nico Besorms did a list of over 400 games that could be seen as esports titles. If you look at League of Legends, on top of that, every country has an ecosystem that works on their own. Then they have the Europe level, works on their own. Then they have the global level. That we have to realize that standardization is a word we only can do in certain fields. So any esports definition needs to be relatively broad. Standardization is something we want, but at the same time, I think it is something, if we are doing a standardization, we are crippling esports in a certain way. We discussed it before, 5 years. If
Yeah.
5 years is this breaking point, I think Jens Hilgers even said that, we cannot talk about standardization. What we can talk about are common grounds or common streams where we say, okay, that are the elements esports stands for. For example, anti-doping, anti-cheating, cultural diversity, anti-discrimination, and all those essential aspects. But at the same time, if we are saying that, we need to be inclusive for any esports title. Look about Fall Guys. I don't know how old the game is. I think it's only a month old, but it's the next hype thing at the moment. And is that esports?
Hard to say. You'll get a split vote, I think, talking to most
Yep.
people. I personally don't think so, but I'm sure there are good arguments why it is.
Yeah, definitely. And that is the part where we need to have this open discussion where we say, okay, what are the aspects we think we find a common ground? What are the aspects where we say, okay, there are differences? There will always be people who say mobile esports is not esports. At the same time, half of esports will say mobile esports is esports. Or Fortnite. I think Fortnite is the most discussed topic, but at the end, it can be esports. So why should it not be esports?
I think I agreed with you completely. I think we have to be flexible, but importantly, and I think potentially more importantly, we have to appreciate that it is a dynamic standardization or definition. So pretty much every year, every 2 years, that should be shifting in its strict criteria to explore how things have changed, rather than saying this is it and this is how it'll always be, because it just doesn't fit what esports is right now.
Yes, that's perfectly put. And that's the part where we have to say, okay, if we are thinking about a dynamic definition and a dynamic environment, there are not that many things in the world we can look up to.
Well, thank you very much for your time, Tobias. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about or mention to the audience?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the interview. Always great to talk about esports. Just the idea, if you are thinking about doing esports research, just connect with us or anybody in the esports research network. We are always happy to help.
That's definitely what I've seen so far. Thank you very much again, Tobias, and hopefully we can have another chat soon.
Yeah, definitely.